Country Life on Midlands 103. Brought to you by W. Orshaw, Burlington Business Park, Tullamore. Supplier of New Holland tractors in the Midlands. worshaw.ie.
Now, good evening and welcome to Country Life here on Midlands 103. It is MJ Clery with you until 8 p.m. this evening. I'm going to bring you all around Laois, Offaly, Westmeath and indeed further afield. The worlds of food, farming and agri-business await. Now, thank you all for joining me on what's a sunny evening and a sunny last couple of days, but still a cool breeze apparent, more than we would care for. We're looking for a little bit more kindness now in relation to the weather, given the time of the year. We've the May bank holiday on top of us, and what a long spring we have had behind us. This evening, in a moment, Offaly man and CEO of Tirlawn, Sean Malloy, speaks about their financial performance for 2025, where their turnover reached almost €3 billion for 2025. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. Also this evening, news on the mechanics of the fuel support scheme have been announced today by the Department of Agriculture. Michael Moroney from the FCI will have information on that later. So how do you claim it and what will it be worth to you? John Connell, author from County Longford, whose work includes the famous Cow Book, is back with another work, and this one is called The Wisdom of Farmers. I have a copy of it here sitting beside me, and I had the good fortune to read it over the weekend, and I have to say an excellent piece of work. I'm going to be talking to John a little bit later. He's going to tell us about the book and what inspired him to write it. Hughie Egan is an Offaly County councillor. He's also a dairy farmer. He spoke in a recent council meeting about how drugs are affecting rural Ireland and in particular farmers. He feels more needs to be done to highlight this problem. He's going to join me later on the programme to discuss that. And towards the end of the hour, we have a man from County Laois, John Egan. He runs a salad business with his son, and he is going to speak about Farmer J's. He's John Senior and there's John Junior, and how money can be made from a simple 1.5 acres. That's what the holding is. They've more land than that, but that's what's dedicated to the business, and they're working away at it, going from strength to strength. So we're going to hear about that a little bit later in the hour. Now, as always, text me or WhatsApp me here, 083 30 10 103. Happy to put anything to our guests this evening. And as I said at the outset, we are starting off with Tirlawn's financial performance for 2025, and we have their CEO, Sean Malloy, County Offaly man. Sean, many thanks for joining me here on the programme.
You're very welcome. Good evening, MJ.
Sean, terrific performance for 2025. We're going to talk about the metrics and the numbers in a moment, but let's retrace the steps, if we will, for a moment, Sean, and let's go back to the start when a group of farmers decided to collectively go together and see what they could achieve at the outset of the cooperative that has turned into this multi-billion-dollar company, cooperative as I should say. If we go back in time, Sean, when did it all start?
Well, I suppose like a lot of the co-ops in the country, it's a huge success story, MJ. The Avonmore folk and Waterford folk can trace their roots back probably over 100 years. To very small, establishments around the country. Probably the more recent history is in 1997 when the two co-ops at the time, Avonmore Foods and Waterford Foods, both PLCs at the time, came together to form what was known after that merger as Glanbia PLC. The more recent history then in 2012 was when we started to restructure the organisation, and the process commenced, which ultimately ended up in the formulation of Tirlawn in 2022. But over that decade or more, a lot of work went on to essentially buy the assets of Glanbia Cooperative out of Glanbia PLC to ultimately in 2022 form Tirlawn. So a long history of growth and of effort and I suppose vision by the farmers who put the organisation together to what it is today.
Yeah, if we're looking at some of the figures, Sean, Tirlawn processed approximately 1/3 of the Irish milk pool in 2025, totalling 3.2 billion litres. 1.8 billion paid to farmers for milk and grain in 2025. These are enormous numbers.
Yeah, they're huge figures. We had last year, as you said at the outset, was a very strong year. We had a great set of financial results. The co-op had a turnover of just close to 3 billion. Exporting to about 100 countries around the world. And we had a great year for milk supply last year. Our volumes grew by about 7%. Milk solids were up further, they were up 9%. and it resulted in a very successful outcome from a profit perspective, with profits up last year by 8% to 39 million. So a very strong year of financial performance in the year gone by.
If we're looking at that turnover, Sean, 2.94 billion, where does the majority of that come from? What aspects of the business?
I suppose the largest part of it is our dairy ingredients business, and that would be the largest part. We essentially form three activities within the business in the main. We have a very strong agribusiness, about 500 million of turnover. It's the largest agribusiness in the country, selling farm inputs around the country, including in the three counties you mentioned at the outset, Laois, Offaly and Westmeath. So that's our agribusiness. We have a consumer foods business then, which is the owner of the Avonmore brand, which is the second most recognised brand in the country. That has a turnover in the order of $500 million as well. And the balance of about 2 billion then comes from our food ingredients, which is essentially taking all of the milk in from our farmers, processing it into a whole variety of ingredients, and they're sold on close to 100 countries around the world.
And when we're talking about Tirlan, obviously milk and dairy, big part of the business. But let's not forget about the grain farmers, the tillage farmers as well. You're a massive purchaser of grain throughout the country also. And it has been a tough couple of years for tillage farmers. Sean, obviously look strong for dairy farmers. Tillage is going through a challenging time and not easy for tillage farmers.
No, it's not at all. And in fact, throughout Laois and Offaly, we purchase quite a bit of grain as well. We're the largest purchaser of grain in the country and the largest user of native grain in the country as well. Last year, I think we took in 230 or 240,000 tonnes of grain into our business. It's a very important part of our business. We have a large number of our co-op shareholders who are grain growers. It's been a tough period for them. Last year, the weather was very good in terms of farming more generally, and particularly for grain. So the harvest was straightforward enough. Yields were quite good, but prices were well back. The problem this year is that you've got difficult sowing conditions in the early part of the year. Now, a lot of work was done the last week with the weather changing. But we've got very high costs on farm, and the outlook for grain, it's improving a little bit at the moment, but it's far below what it would need to be to make the business return for the effort involved by the growers.
Which is unfortunate, Sean, isn't it? Considering, tillage farmers, they put so much work in, and it's such a challenging industry, and we're seeing fuel prices well where they are. It's just it's tough to keep up resolve in that area.
It is, and it's an important industry. It's the provider of straw and feed for our dairy farmers. It provides an important contribution to the areas where it's grown. And also, we've developed a good line of grain into food and exporting grain into food around the world as well, particularly into oats. Our gluten-free oats is a great product for us. But ultimately, it's a tough business to make the return that merits for the effort and risk, in fact, that farmers put into it. Now, this year, the particular concern is around the height the fertiliser prices have gone to. One of the probably bright sparks for ourselves is that we had a lot of fertiliser sold in advance of the height of the price increases. So about 70% of our fertiliser was sold before the Iran-driven price increases that have occurred in the last couple of months. So that's helpful, but it's still a tough environment for grain growers.
If we're looking, Sean, I mentioned at the outset that I have an author from County Longford on, John Connolly's on later in the programme. And his,
The Wisdom of Farmers, yeah.
Yes, and his book, there's one area of it, and it's all about food. I suppose food, where it comes from, and our relationship with food as farmers. Look, you're on the side of it, on this huge scale side of it with Tirlan, and there's food ingredients going all over the world. I suppose in the last number of years we've seen the likes of protein being a big one for consumers globally. Is there anything you're seeing in meetings and you're talking to people about where food is going at the moment? Is there an avenue that consumers are looking for, that you're looking into in Tirlan?
Oh, we are, and we're very much investing behind it. So the big trend at the moment is around protein. And whilst markets since last autumn have declined significantly on the dairy side, the one significant bright outlook is for protein. So if we look at our main markets that we sell our protein products into, they're expanding. They are paying good returns, and they're very resilient in terms of those returns, despite the challenges in other market sectors. So as a result of that, MJ, last autumn, we made a decision as part of the business to invest 127 million in value-add whey protein isolate, WPI, processing which will be sold into very strong markets that we're seeing across the world, particularly in the US and indeed in parts of Europe, for protein products. And that's driven by the trend of health and lifestyle within the food market, and particularly helped by the advent of drugs related to weight control, and GLP-1 in the States is a huge driver of that market, and people needing to have meal replacements which are of a high protein content. So we're very much in the right space there, either through good fortune or good planning. And we're hoping that that new facility that we have will come and play. It's the biggest investment in added value dairy processing, I would say, in the history of the state. And we're hoping that that will come and play in the summer of 2027.
Another area, when I have you, Sean, is €15 million that you have put into generational renewal. It's your programme where you're looking for the next generation of farmers. It is a massively, massively important area. And obviously for yourselves, you need the dairy farmer and tillage farmer of the future to keep the business going.
We do, and I make a couple of comments on that. First of all, if I look around the world, I think the one serious challenge facing society and facing the food industry is the question around where the next generation of farmers will come from. We're losing a huge amount of people from farming, and that's occurring over a long period of time. It's not just a factor in Ireland, it's a factor internationally. But we've got to be very careful that we have a population of young people, be they men or women, who are going to produce the food for us. And we think that's something that we need to focus on. It's important for our business because, as you're right, if we don't have milk or grain in the plants, then those facilities are challenged. But also, if you think about it, MJ, on a farm, the greatest asset you have is your land base. And if you turn the clock forward and at a point in time there's nobody interested in farming, then the value of that asset actually is challenged as well. So what we have done last year is we put a 15 million programme in place. It's the first of its kind in the state. Now, it's great to see some of the other co-ops have followed suit with their own programmes, which is very encouraging. And that's actually focused on helping new entrants in the first few years of their production, which is a very costly period to try and get into dairy farming in particular. Now, it's worked very well. I'm glad to say that this year we have a record number of new entrants coming into dairy, and we have 52 new entrants coming in this year. And that follows 40 last year. So we're getting a very good return from that programme. And that's a very encouraging thing to see. Even though the prices are not as attractive this year as they might have been last year and the costs are high, it's great to see the young generation putting themselves forward and saying that they want to be farmers into the future. And that's a wonderfully important thing. And what we'd also encourage, MJ, is that our policymakers, be they in Brussels or in Dublin, would equally help and support those people who are extraordinarily brave, confident people, very skilled, who represent the future of our industry.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Sean, lastly, before I let you go, milk prices, grain prices. Obviously, look, milk prices, dairy farmers, towards the end of last year, worried about the downturn in milk prices. Where do we see milk prices in the coming months? And maybe just a word on grain prices then for later in the year, please.
So on the milk side, we're living in extraordinarily volatile times, so it's very difficult to be predicting with great confidence beyond a 2 or 3 month period, MJ. Now, in that context, we have taken, which is a bit of a departure from the norm, a decision in the last couple of weeks to actually set a floor in milk prices for the next 3 months, which is unusual. We normally do a month at a time. So we've set a floor of 37.08 centilitre for milk plus constituents over that period of time. So there's some certainty to farmers. Now, we would like to be at a higher price, to be frank about it, but the market is struggling to return that today. The positive side of the market is the demand is still strong, albeit at lower prices. Europe is exporting and there's demand for product in the market. Very good market, as I said earlier, for protein, but for butter, fat and cheese, still quite challenged. So I think we're going to be in that territory of pricing for the next little while. We need a supply correction really to happen, MJ, internationally for markets to recover to where we would like them to be. And that's something that we're looking towards. On the grain side, reading some encouraging notes in the last few days where we're seeing a little bit of a bounce in the market driven by uncertainty of supply internationally this coming autumn, with planting probably a bit back and conditions for growth in the US not being as favourable as they might be. That said, the price point that we're looking towards the autumn at this point in time is not encouraging, and we hope that improves before we get to the point where we're buying grain from our grain growers.
Fingers crossed. Sean, I'm going to say many thanks for joining me here on the programme. Great rundown there, and look, it is a great success story in Irish business going from strength to strength. Many thanks, Sean, and we will speak to you again on the programme.
Nice talking to you, MJ. Take care. Bye-bye.
Sean Malloy there, and he is the CEO of Tirlawn, County Offaly man, and revenue €2.94 billion in 2025. And of course, jewel in the crown for Tirlawn is they have a 17.9% shareholding in Glanbia PLC, valued at €734 million. So it leads to a very, very strong balance sheet as a result of that. Now, that is it for the first part of the programme. I'm going to go to a break, and after I'm going to be speaking to Michael Moroney. He's from the FCI. So Fuel Support Scheme, how can you access it and what is it worth to you? That's the question I'm going to put to him, and hopefully we'll have an answer in a few minutes' time. Also, Hughie Egan from Offaly County Council raised the unfortunate aspect of drug addiction in rural Ireland and indeed the rural Midlands. We're going to be hearing about that in just a moment.
Country Life on Midlands 103.
With W.R. Shaw, family owned and serving the Midlands since 1982, we're Ireland's largest independent agri-dealer, specialising in New Holland tractors and parts. With over 40 years' experience, we provide top quality sales, service and support. Visit W.R. Shaw in Tullamore and Carlow or online at wrshaw.ie.
And you're very welcome back to Country Life here on Midlands 103. Now we have the Fuel Support Scheme. So details announced today. Let's find out about them. Michael Moroney from the FCI is joining me. Michael, many thanks for taking my call this evening.
Thanks for having me on your programme, MJ.
More than welcome, Michael. So look, people are obviously in dire straits, dire need for this income support. So let's speak about the metrics of it, Michael, please. How is it going to work for people?
Well, from a contractor's perspective, the information that we in FCI have been given by the department is that the scheme, the 20 cent per litre scheme, will be available to VAT registered contractors in the first instance, and businesses that are tax compliant, whether they're sole traders or limited companies. Now, the scheme will open for applications in, I would say, the week after next. It doesn't look like it'll be ready next week, but perhaps it will be. And the really fine-tuned details will be on the scheme forms. It'll be a paper scheme rather than the situation where farmers will apply for their funding, diesel funding, under their department IBIS Ag account with the department online.
Let's talk about the figures. Michael, what's it going to be worth for contractors?
Well, it'll be worth 20 cent a litre. So 1,000 litres, it's equivalent of €200 on 1,000 litres of diesel. And what will be done is it'll be calculated on the basis of your annual use of diesel in 2025, and the payments will be made for a period for your estimated, based on that, your estimated diesel usage from the 1st of March to the 31st of July. So it'll be based on that usage level, and it'll be a maximum payment of €50,000 for any agricultural or forestry contractor.
Look, that figure, obviously, it sounds big for farmers, sounds big for me, Michael, but I'm not an agri-contractor. In relation to diesel usage for a large outfit, how is that going to work? Is the ceiling going to be reached easily, I suppose?
I think for large outfits it would. I mean, if you take a typical silage, self-propelled silage harvester outfit, the numbers we looked at was the increase in diesel from last year to this year was the equivalent of €2,800 extra per day. Now that's a very significant amount, which is about €28 per acre based on 100 acres of silage harvested a day, an additional cost to the contractor. So what this does is it doesn't go the whole way, and there's areas like lubrication oils have increased significantly, and products like AdBlue, which most contractors would use with their fuel, they've also increased. So look, it's not an ideal scenario, MJ, but it certainly does help people in the current situation where our whole sector is facing very significant inflation cost increases.
You were speaking about contractors there, Michael, and obviously, look, contractors is your given area, but we did allude to farmers as well, and they can make an application through Ag Food. Farmers, the contractors have to be VAT registered contractors. I'm presuming farmers, majority are not VAT registered, will be able to make an application without a VAT registration number.
Yeah, they will be. They'll be able to make the application through their Department Ag account details through that system. But contractors aren't registered with the department. Say contractor companies or sole traders aren't currently registered, so their applications, because of that, will be paper-based applications.
And I suppose from your perspective, Michael, good to have contractors' details now in with the department. You're, a registered contractor here if you get this payment back, and it'll go some way to getting formal acknowledgement, I suppose, from the department of your existence as an entity.
Yeah, that's for sure, MJ. And we spent over 10, 12 years working with the department to try and get recognition for the sector. The important role that contractors play. And we know it based on the data from Teagasc, where somewhere in the region of €7,900 per year is the average spent on contractor services, which when we roll that up, it's nearly €1 billion. So from that point of view, the sector is important. This is the first time it's recognised. And it's also significant that prior to this, we had done a lot of work with the department teams there, and a working group on agricultural contracting and forestry contracting was set up, and the first meeting of that was held on the 20th of April. So that's very significant against the background of everything else that's happened since the start of this year, and it's an important recognition that the sector has an important part to play within the whole agri sector.
Yeah, I would go further even, Michael, more than an important and absolutely vital role to play. And as I often say it here in the programme, farmers up and down the country, we're very thankful to all the hard work contractors do, because without the contractors, we'd have no industry really. Michael, thanks for joining me here on the programme, and I'll speak to you again in the future.
Thank you, MJ.
Michael Moroney there from the FCI. So they are the details of that scheme, and going to be ready to go in the coming weeks, and it will be badly needed. Now, moving on to something that I suppose I'd prefer not to be talking about with Offaly County Councillor Hughie Egan. Hughie, many thanks for taking my call this evening.
Evening, MJ. How are you?
And as I alluded to there, Hugh, we prefer not to be having this conversation, but unfortunately it's something we have to speak about in rural Ireland. Headline on the Irish Farming Independent yesterday, yourself, councillor, shocked at drug addiction sweeping through Offaly's farming community. Can you elaborate a little first, please, Hughie?
Well, I don't know, is it so much a drug addiction as drug abuse, probably more so at the April meeting there at the Offaly County Council. I just wanted to highlight the issue of drug abuse following representations that were probably made to me over the last maybe 8 to 10 months, but they've become I've had an awful lot more of those representations even since Christmas. MJ, it's the reason I was raising it at the April meeting was I was trying to highlight the issues so that the newly formed local communities safety partnership chaired by Councillor Eddie Fitzpatrick there, when they're drawing up the strategic plan that to try and keep this on top of the agenda. It's actually frightening, some of the stuff that I've found out when I did look into it. I know drug abuse is both an urban and rural problem, but suppose the attention was brought to it very much so from reps from families who have had such issues and drug debts probably to be paid off and things like that, and they just don't know where to turn. So I think there's some support, some need of some sort of a support mechanism needs to be put in place, and I was asking that local community safety partnership to try and highlight this and see if anything can be done for people in rural Ireland.
I suppose as well, Hughie, when we're talking about this and we're talking about rural dwellers and in particular farmers here at the farming programme, obviously that younger farmers, they're going to have access to assets that I suppose the average young rural dweller won't have, be it machinery, be it stock, and to run up debts, drug debts, they're going to be a target, if you will, for the sellers of these drugs, seen as they're going to be in a position to be able to sell something to pay for them. And I suppose at the end of the day, that's what they're looking at.
Yeah, and come here, I know you said young people, but this doesn't seem to be age relevant. Like some of the cases that I have come across, like it's not altogether young people, it could be even middle-aged people. But my worry is that they're actually targeting these people that have these assets of machinery and of livestock and things that they can be offloaded to pay down these drug debts. I've heard of a couple of cases where that has happened, where livestock and machinery has been offloaded or sold to pay down these debts. And it's a burden on people. It's a burden on families, and it's a worrying thing, because I suppose, like everything else, why there's loads of services there for people out in rural Ireland, they're probably not as aware of them. And it was just interesting to hear your previous speaker there, Sean Malloy, talking about what Lambia are doing for young farmers and bringing new entrants into make, and that supports that they have there in not Lambia but Tirlawn now. And he said the greatest asset is the land that they own. And I probably differ with them slightly there. I think the greatest asset we have as farmers is our young people and our youth. And they need to be looked after every bit as much as the land or the machinery or anything else around the place. And I think it really needs to be highlighted. And it's out there. There's no point in us letting all it's not anymore. I would rather be talking to you this evening maybe about grass growth or grass covers or pre-breeding plans or something like that. But unfortunately, this is out here, and I think it really needs to be highlighted. So that's kind of why I was bringing it forward.
And I would agree with you. We would prefer to be talking about something else. But as you say, when the problem is there and when it's an issue, it does need to be highlighted. And that's the reason for the few minutes this evening. And also, as you say, you're calling on more support mechanisms, and it is something that needs to be out in the open, that people need to be able to converse about. And if you are affected by it, unfortunately, that you need to go and seek some help. Now, you mightn't be seeking the help if you're the person abusing the drugs, but maybe if you're a family member or you're in the midst of it all, they're the people who are going to have to reach out, look for help, and hopefully receive it.
And that's why I think we need a dedicated service, because sometimes when that pressure becomes intense, people push to the limits and they make decisions, and some decisions to make life-changing consequences for families. And we definitely don't want to go down that road. So I would appeal to anyone who's in the decision to talk to someone, even though one of our councillors last week called for training for us, Councillor Hennessy, over at Borough, to deal with the likes of this thing. But we mightn't be well trained up in it, but at least come to us and we can find out where the channels are that we can direct you towards, and what help we can give you. Like the old saying goes, a problem shared is a problem halved, anyway, for a start.
And on that, Hugh, and just out of time, so I'm going to say thanks for dialing in this evening and raising our awareness on that. And look, as we say, we prefer to speak about something else, but these issues need to be highlighted. I'll say thanks for speaking, Hughie, and we'll chat to you again on the programme.
Okay, MJ, thanks a million. Bye.
Hughie Egan there, Offaly County Council, on the unfortunate aspect of drug abuse in rural Ireland and among young, and not only young, as Hughie said in his article here on the, well, it wasn't an article, it was a piece taken from the council meeting. He pointed out that farmers suffering from drug abuse are in the age range of 35, 40, 45, 50 up to 55 years of age. It's across the board, and it is something becoming more and more and more pertinent across rural Ireland. Now I'm going to go to a break, and after I'm speaking to John Connell about his new book, The Wisdom of Farmers, so stay tuned for that.
Country Life on Midlands 103.
Brought to you by W.R. Shaw, where New Holland isn't just a brand, it's our passion. For over 40 years, we've been Ireland's trusted name for New Holland tractors, parts and farm machinery. Whether you need new, used or ex-hire tractors, we've got you covered. wrshaw.ie.
Now, you're very welcome back to Country Life here on Midlands 103, and we're moving on to a piece of literature, The Wisdom of Farmers. We have the man from County Longford, John Connell, on the line. John, many thanks for taking my call this evening.
I'm delighted to be back, MJ. It's a great programme and I always love coming on.
Well, thanks a million, John. And I have it in my hand here, The Wisdom of Farmers, what we can learn from the land. And I had the joy of reading it over the weekend. Now, my family mightn't be saying the same thing, because I kind of went into a cocoon on Sunday and I wasn't much of a man to play with the smallies, because I said I had to get through it. But I was being a bit selfish, I suppose. I was enjoying it as I went through it. And we'll talk about it in a moment, John. It's broken down into different areas. A real easy read. But what was the inspiration for it, John? What got you moving in this direction?
Well, yeah, it was a simple one, MJ. My wife is Australian, and we had a son, Ted, 3 years ago, and we were over in Australia visiting the family, and I was staying with my sister and brother-in-law, my sister-in-law and her husband, I should say, and I was doing a Zoom call in his office, and he works, he's the vice president of a banking group for the Asia Pacific, so quite senior. And I was waiting to do the call, and I looked at his bookshelf, and he had a lot of business books and self-help books in terms of business and stuff. And I started to look at them a bit closer, and I realised they were all from the city, from the urban world. And I said to myself, there's nothing here from rural life. And, Australia has a big outback. There's lots of farmers there. And I said to him, have you ever come across any rural? And he said, no. He said, but if I did, I would buy it. He said, because I know there's some knowledge there. And, of course, MJ, as we know, farmers are some of the wisest people you could meet. So that's where the idea started. And in another sense, I'm 10 years at home now from Australia myself, and I did a lot of travelling in those 10 years, and we're all kind of different journeys. I worked with farm workers in America. I went to the Cage of Fields in Mayo, and suddenly as I started to write this book about 3 years ago, all those journeys started to kind of coalesce into one coherent story, which was that farming, which is 10,000 years old, had a very deep knowledge base that actually people in the city as well as the countryside could learn from.
Well, absolutely, John. I think farmers are, as you said, a lot of wisdom in farming, and it's broken down into different areas. And obviously, look, we could talk about it for the evening, but we're under a time constraint. So I'm just going to pick a few different parts that resonated with me as I was reading it. And one of those is, be as stoic as a farmer. You'll never get everything right. So this idea of stoicism, John, I come across it a bit, and I have a great interest in it. For maybe someone who isn't familiar with it, can you explain what it is briefly, and then how you integrate it into the book?
Yeah, so Stoicism is an ancient Greek philosophy. This man, Zeno, he had a ship crash in the Mediterranean, and he arrived in Athens, and he said, he was reading a book, and he said, is there any philosophers around anymore? And the bookshop owner pointed out this man, and he kind of come under his tutelage. And Stoicism really, there's a guy called Seneca who kind of really made it famous. And it's about taking the blows of life and responding to it with, I suppose, with bravery and decisiveness. And I started when I was reading about Stoicism, and it's very popular now. There's lots of books on Stoicism, and the world is a hard place, so we all need to have the right mental attitude to face into it. And I started to realise that old phrase, where you'll have livestock, you'll have dead stuff, is a big part of Stoicism. And I realised, MJ, that the first philosophers were actually farmers. Like that Zeno, when he was asking was there any philosophers around, all he really should have done was went outside Athens to the countryside, because, as I say in the book, the very first farmers had to learn patience and a philosophical thought, because, as I relate in the book, if you're sitting with a cow waiting for her to calve, it's going to take a few hours, and you're going to have some deep thoughts about where your life is at. If it's going well, it's great, but if it isn't, that's important too. So I suppose I wanted people to think about that, and then I did a bit further research into it, and I talked with Associate Professor Conor Hammersley, who's based over in New York, and we talked about Stoicism and farmers and mental health, and it kind of blossomed into this whole thing about facing adversity, and actually the Irish twist on it, which is what I call the Mehel Stoicism, that you shouldn't face everything alone. There's times where you need your community. And for example, like if you were looking at, say, someone got sick, there might be a tractor run in aid of fundraising, or, as I relate in the book, when my uncle passed away over a decade ago, the community came together to one last time. Nobody asked them to, but they all came together. It was silage time, and they made the season's worth of silage for the family. And I think that's where the Mehel spirit comes in. But Stoicism is something that's very important. And I talked with a farmer based in outback New South Wales in Australia, out near the desert, who dealt with two big droughts in close succession, and he said, you have to have the right mental attitude to survive a drought, because it's not just going to be over in a day or two. It could take years. And in the case of when I interviewed him, he'd been through a drought that had lasted 3 years.
That leads me on to the next part I was going to mention, John, is that element of the book, the chapter called Be As Brave as a Cowboy, Cultivating the Right Mental Attitude. And when I started reading this, I started listening to the programme here over the last few years. I watched Yellowstone, the TV
sure, we're all
programme.
big fans of Yellowstone.
Yeah, I thought just some aspects of it, the writer Taylor Sheridan, I think he kind of nailed, food production and farmers and their affinity with the land and whatnot. I thought it was very well put together. And anytime I say anything about a cowboy now, I'll always think of Yellowstone, and I did think about it as I was reading through it, the affinity between the farmer and the land. But there was a particular point in that chapter, and it was where you referenced a Canadian doctor, Gabor Mate, again quite prominent on social media and whatnot now, but he looked at stress in great detail, and in the book I'm reading from it, it says, stress, he expands, is not merely nervous tension, indeed it can be the cause of illness, and he goes on and speaks about it. And I just thought really interesting bringing that back into the land and into farming and how we deal with that.
Yeah, well, I suppose there's multiple, and Gabor Mate, I came across him on Brendan O'Connor a couple of years ago. He was on RTE, and I thought, wow, this is an amazing guy, and subsequently saw him on social media as well. And I picked up his book, which I have here in the library somewhere. I say the library, it's the office, but there's a lot of books in it. But Gabor, a very interesting guy, Canadian doctor, and he's kind of looked in depth at stress. And I suppose there's multiple levels of stress. You see, there's stress that land has to bear from, let's say, intensive use or too much use. There's the stress we, the farmer, have to bear. And sometimes there's, as my brother would say, what's stressful for one man might be hell on earth for another. And so stress is something we have to learn to live with. And in the book, in that chapter, I tell the story of the bullfighter Ronaldo, and he was saying, I was talking about being brave and dealing with stress, and I interviewed him over in Madrid, and he was fighting in the Plaza del Toros de las Ventas, and he said, I said, well, are you worried? Are you stressed going into a fight? He said, yes. He said, of course I am. But he said, if I don't, he said, you have to have big cojones, and I think anyone would know what that means. But he said, you have to have cojones to go into the ring and know that, today might not be your lucky day. And so I suppose stress is something we all live with. And I suppose I'm conscious of people, as I would say, on the front lines of life who have to deal with stress every day. And on a farm, we just finished lambing season, and that can be a stressful time, and things go right and things go wrong, and you're working on lack of sleep. So I suppose that particular tenet of the book was to say, be aware of stress and try and manage it. And I give the example of Bill Pickett, who was a rodeo star in America, a black cowboy, and he lived and died by the ring. He died in the ring. But he ultimately said that, he took the bull by the horns and it made him his name. So it's an interesting one. And Gabor Mate, for any of your listeners, you'd get his books anywhere. He's a very good psychologist and writer on stress and the modern world. And it was something that I felt needed to be said. And he has a book here which I'm just looking at, When the Body Says No, which is where I got When the Body Says No, the Cost of Hidden Stress. And I suppose we all need to be aware of it. We all live very busy lives in this modern world, and stress can be a killer as well. So to be cognizant of that.
Yeah, well, look, there's something for everybody in it, John. You don't have to be a farmer to read it. As I said, look, could chat to you for a couple of programmes running. We could go through it all, but unfortunately just out of time. But I will say, genuinely, I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's a lovely short read. You'd sit down and read it there with a cup of tea over maybe 20 minutes a day over a week. You'd have it done. Yeah,
exactly. And that's how it was designed, MJ. As you know, all my books are easily read and they're accessible for everybody. And we take big ideas and make them into normal language. There's no, as Hemingway would say, there's no $10 words. It's simple writing, and I'm glad to say the book's in its fourth week in the bestseller list, and it is reaching people, and it comes out in Australia and New Zealand next month. So we're doing the rounds of the world now, and it's out in the UK and Ireland as well, and it's in every bookshop in the country. So no problem getting it.
We wish you all the best. Anything that's bringing a spotlight onto farming and the trials and tribulations and the joy of farming is a good thing, John. So we'll speak to you again in the programme, and many thanks.
Thanks, MJ.
John Connell there. The Wisdom of Farmers, as John said, is available in all good bookshops, and a very good read, and a nice straightforward one as well. Now, coming up after the break, I'm going to be talking to Leishman John Egan. He's the man behind Farmer J's. So it is a salad business where himself and his son are turning a profit from 1.5 acres.
Country Life on Midlands 103.
With W.R. Shaw. Looking for the best in farm machinery? We've been supplying top quality New Holland tractors and parts and providing service since 1982. Our expert team is here to keep your farm running smoothly with branches in Tullamore and Carlow. Visit wrshaw.ie today.
And you're welcome back to Country Life on Midlands 103. Now, our last part of this evening's programme is John Egan. He is under the brand name of Farmer J's from Rathneska in County Laois. John, many thanks for taking my call this evening.
Thank you, MJ.
You're more than welcome, John, and thanks for joining me. It's, my opening line to you, John, is lots of farmers, they find it difficult to turn a profit at all, but you're making money from 1.5 acres, no less. Tell us a little bit about this.
I wouldn't say it's a lot of money now, but we just about break even, you know.
And the business, John, what is it?
The business at the moment, it's salad leaves year round. We have 12, and for the summer from now, in our sort of 30-metre beds, they're only 30 centimetres wide, broad forks, and fertility built up over a few years. Everything done by hand.
And your market, John, where are you selling your wares?
Well, Super Value would be our great supporters. We're in Portlaoise, Aberdeen, Stradbally, Newbridge, Athy, and on top of that, then we have a number of very good restaurants who've been supportive for years. Right up as far as I was in Dewdrop in Naas today, Kill. Dove in Newbridge, Stapley Fair, and then a few delis. You know.
Yeah, you've a variety of customers. And tell me, John, how did you decide to start growing salad leaves in the polytunnels? Where did the inspiration for this come from? Did you see it somewhere and say, I might do that? Or what was the background?
I always wanted a few acres, and I kept a few horses. I moved out here over 20 years ago, and the first thing I did was put up a tunnel, 20 metre long. So I was a hobby grower, you know. Mm. And fortunately, I lost my business to the big recession in 14. So I had more time. I was building up tons and tons of horse manure, and I have a shop in Portlaoise and off license too. So I had an endless supply of cardboard. And coincidentally, we came across this guy called Richard Perkins, who was farming a small market garden in Sweden. So I was intrigued by his technique. Lay down the cardboard, put your manure on top, cover it over, and the next year plant into it. So my son, by coincidence, was also watching this guy, unnoticed me. And he came out visiting one day and he said, there could be something in this. I was building my first bed. I think we have 5 kilometres of beds now. So we sort of accidentally fell into it.
And the work aspect of it then, John. So look, as we know, farmers here listening to the programme, and a small garden, a little bed at the back of the house can be plenty of work if you're going to do it right. So as you say, 5 kilometres of beds, and you're doing it all by hand. Labour, is it all the family involved, or who helps?
Mostly my son. It's how you... we keep the soil covered when not in use. That might explain it better. So we use silage tarps for large areas. We use Protex ground cover, and peel that back then when we want to plant in. Now, it does get beyond us at times, and it's a real struggle to get it back, you know.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, just from a logistic perspective of planting, of harvesting, of then delivering all your produce, of bagging it, it's a big endeavour.
It is. It's we don't try and do too much, you know. We have our good customers, and that's it. Now we have a new development in that we're going to grade it up a bit. We have a distributor has asked us to supply them LaRousse Foods, which is great, and we'll do specific crops for them. So we're sowing now for the autumn supply into them.
Yeah, I'll be honest, John, I think it's a great story, genuinely. And I said at the outset about making money or turning money from an acre and a half. A lot of farmers will have a large amount of land. They look at a paddock or a haggard area, might be an acre, and they just won't even think about it. It's just left, it's overgrown.
Yeah.
And here you are, with a business, a thriving business who's going from strength to strength on that area. And I just think it's very, very encouraging. We're just out of time, John. So look, if people are interested in Farmer J's produce, you mentioned the areas around the Midlands, and by all means go and purchase them. We wish you all the best with the endeavour, John. We'll speak to you again in the programme.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
John Egan there from Farmer J's, and himself and his son, John Jr. and John Sr., involved in that business. And as I said, acre and a half and making money from it, which is quite the inspiration and shows what you can do with land when you put your mind to it. That is it for this evening's programme. I would like to thank all of our guests here over the course of the last hour. Busy programme this evening. We started with Sean Malloy from County Offaly. He's the CEO of Tyrlawn. Then we moved on. Michael Moroney from the FCI and Hughie Egan from Offaly County Council. John Connell about his book The Wisdom of Farmers. And we finished up there with John Egan from Rathaneska and his Farmer J's brand of leaves. We will be repeated on Sunday morning, as always, 7 a.m. through to 8 a.m. We'll be back with you next Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. As always, we'll be in the month of May at that stage and hoping for a little bit more kindness in relation to the weather. You can also get us wherever you get your podcasts. If you type in MJ space Clery, Clery, we will pop up and you can listen at your leisure. I've mentioned we're on YouTube as well, so we are available on all different platforms, and we will be back with you in 7 days' time, as I said. So good evening, and we'll speak to you then.